Now I'd like to get to the keynote speaker. Our guest today is Jack Brennan. Jack is a native son of Boston with a family history steeped in local roots. His father, Frank Brennan, was a longtime CEO of Union Warren Savings Bank. His brother Tom is a senior officer at the Bank of America, long-term regular at our seminar, and he's here today as well. Jack's son is here as well, too, one of his sons. Jack is Chairman Emeritus and Senior Advisor to the Vanguard Group, one of the world's largest investment companies. Headquartered in Malvern, Pennsylvania, Vanguard has current assets of more than $4 trillion. Jack joined Vanguard in 1982, was elected president in 1989, and served as Chief Executive Officer from 1996 to 2008, as Chairman of the Board from 1998 to 2009. Jack is a lead director of General Electric, a director of the American Express Company, a director of Guardian Life Insurance Company, chairman of the Board of Trustees of the University of Notre Dame, go Irish, chairman of Vanguard Charitable Endowment Program, a member of the Pennsylvania Early Learning Investment Commission, co-chair of the CEO Task Force on Early Childhood, and chairman of the Catholic Investment Services. I mean, I could go on and on. A couple of more, founding trustee of King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and past chairman of the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the Financial Accounting Foundation, and the Investment Company Institute. Jack is a graduate of Dartmouth College. He received his MBA from Harvard Business School. He has received honorary degrees from several colleges. Jack has 3 children who have graduated from Notre Dame. He and his wife also have a summer home of Cape Cod. His wife is also a graduate of Dartmouth and HBS. Great family, great heritage, and it's our great pleasure to have Jack back in his hometown as keynote speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the warm introduction, and thanks for the position between 1,000 people and the cocktail party. So I recognize my role here, which is to get you to the reception, which is what everybody says is tremendous. But really an interesting panel, and on point, frankly, with what I thought I would spend a little time talking to you about this evening. I'm not much of a memorabilia guy, which drives my wife crazy, but at one point a while ago, I was up talking to your Chamber of Commerce. They'd asked me to come to the heart of the mutual fund industry to talk about my thoughts on the mutual fund business. And what I wanted to start out with was saying there are some of us who think the heart of the mutual fund industry is in that booming metropolis known as Malvern, Pennsylvania. That company which has been led by a Winchester High School graduate, a Wellesley High School graduate, and as of January 1, a Belmont Hill graduate over the last couple of decades, and it'll be 30 or 40 years of Bostonians leading that company. But I didn't say that because that would be rude there, but it's not rude here, and it's a lot of years later. Last question I got asked at that session a while ago was, when will you come back so we can tell whether what you forecast was true? Thinking that would mean I could answer it by saying I'll never come back. I said, I'll come back when the Red Sox win the World Series. And as I look at the picture that hangs in my office, and I look at the date, it was 50 weeks to the day before the Red Sox won the World Series. And I think about that because it was giving a talk in 60 State Street, and looking out the window, there wasn't much out here. And I think about this, where we are today, and the physical manifestation of how much has changed in this region and how impressive it is. For a Bostonian looking at it from afar over that decade and a half, it's really amazing. And the Seaport District, maybe nothing more than that, demonstrates it and manifests it so amazingly. But you know, once a Bostonian, always Bostonian, as any of you who have left and come back, or left and are just visiting. And I would tell you that around the world, I get asked about American competitiveness and are we going to fade and all these things when I'm giving talks or I'm with dignitaries. And I tell you that I use this region, the Greater Boston region, as a metaphor, and particularly things like the Massachusetts miracle of the 80s and what's going on today, as a metaphor for our country's ability to adapt and evolve and maintain global economic leadership. So it's so fun to hear the panel discussions about what's going on and the tee up to the discussion about what's going on here. And what I thought I'd spend my few minutes with you today is talking a little bit about the perspective that somebody sees from the outside about, you see it from the inside. You're working deals, you're leasing space, you're developing properties, you're financing them. I want to give you a little bigger picture view of that, but importantly in the context of why someone like me looking at this region from the outside does use it as a metaphor for resiliency and competitiveness, and why our country more broadly, but this region in particular, does so well in that regard. That said, I'm an incurable analyst. I'm an incurable analyst from when I was trained as a summer kid at the First National Bank of Boston many decades ago. And I think of competitive advantage, and that's what regional competition is about, is competitive advantage in certain ways. I think of it as a stock and bond guy. I think about companies and private sector entities as having certain key characteristics, and I think the same thing is absolutely true about regions. And our little company had a couple hundred people in one building when I went there 35 years ago, and it's tens of thousands all over the world today. So we've made regional choices. We've made regional choices. So we think about how do you and where do you want to be. When I think about companies, I think there are 6 things, and you can think about companies, educational institutions, any private sector enterprise. I think there are 6 things that lead to long-term greatness. And again, I encourage you to think about it. The 6 things are these. 1 is a great, deep leadership teams. 2 is a clear and distinguished mission and strategies. 3rd is clearly differentiated products and services. 4th are bulletproof financials. 5th is a never-ending desire to win and continually improve. Then the 6th thing that you see in great private sector enterprises is passionate, loyal customers and constituents. Think about any of the private sector organizations. They may be for-profit companies, they may be not-for-profit, they may be educational institutions or whatever. But most of the ones you admire most of the ones you value as clients or competitors, have those 6 traits, or most of those traits. I pulled out the list of the world's most admired companies a couple of weeks ago. It was interesting to read. The top 20 are all American. And they all have some element of those 6 traits. If you look at the rankings of the greatest universities in this country and the world, the same thing is true. The same thing is true. Great enterprises focus on those things, and that's how they become great. I want to comment on each of those traits just very quickly and mention 3 enterprises that are relatively new to this region, but important and growing in importance, and 3 well-established enterprises that are so well known here, but as competitive nationally and globally as you could ever want in their spheres. The first of those traits that I mentioned is great leadership teams. Think about Alphabet, Google. I wasn't here 15 years ago, burgeoning employer in this region, making a big difference. It's an amazing company that is far too rare, because it's an amazing company that went from startup phenomenon to a globally dominant and diversified organization led by the same founders who started it at Stanford University. The way they've been able to do what most companies don't do in that space is they've had a relentless commitment to supplementing themselves as founders with seasoned leaders from elsewhere, frequently not from the tech business. Google is great for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons is that Google is great. It has a relentless focus on having almost too many great people and great leaders in its organization. The competitors it's blown away didn't have that same trait. The second key trait that great organizations have is a clear and distinguished mission and strategy. Here in this region, I'd mention MIT. MIT's website says, the mission of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is to advance knowledge and educate students in science, technology, and other areas of scholarship that will best serve the nation and the world in the 21st century. We are also driven to bring knowledge to bear on the world's greatest challenges. It might have said something else. We don't want to be Harvard. We don't want to be Yale. We don't want to be Stanford. We're MIT. We're MIT. And I suspect that most of us in this audience, just from being in this region, may not have gotten it word for word, but could easily articulate the mission and strategy of MIT and why it's the best in the world at what it does. Why it's the best in the world at what it does. Their brand is as valuable as any brand in the world, if you think about it. Distinctive mission and strategy. The third thing that differentiates organizations is clearly differentiated products and services, and I think of Southwest Airlines. Non-existent here and now a major force at Logan Airport. They fly one plane, they fly it point to point, and they do it domestically. And they have the highest customer satisfaction rankings in their industry and the highest market valuation. One thing, simple, deliver against it, and everybody knows it. Fourth enterprise I'd mentioned is Harvard, and that's around bulletproof financials. And if you just read the newspapers, people had a lot of fun during the financial crisis kicking Harvard around because its endowment lost a lot of money. Well, so did every educational institution's endowment. But Harvard went into the financial crisis in much better shape than their peers because it's less reliant on its endowment than other major financial institutions. Other educational institutions, excuse me. They went into it better prepared for the crisis, came out of it with its AAA rating reaffirmed. You'd never know it if you just read the headlines, but the fact of the matter is, when you look at universities with the resources to do whatever it takes to be the best, Harvard is deservedly at the top of that list because of those bulletproof financials, the fourth key character trait that great organizations have. The fifth organization I will mention is Amazon. I know it's a hot topic. It's been mentioned several times here today. And nobody demonstrates that never-ending desire to win and continuously improve better than Amazon. Amazon reminds me of the best insult I was ever paid. There's a person who joined Vanguard as a leader and was had come from a big bank. And Vanguard is anything but a big bank. And about a year in, I called her up and said, "How you doing? You enjoying this?" And she goes, "I'm not sure I'm enjoying it." I said, "Well, that's candid." And I said, "Why is that?" And she goes, "You don't know what it's like to work for you. You live in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction." I said, "The difference between you and me and where you came from and where we are is this. You think that's an insult. I think it's a compliment. That's why we're doing okay and your bank's part of another bank." Amazon manifests this trait of perpetual state of dissatisfaction in a positive way better than any organization I think I've ever seen in my career. They're relentless. Think about how many dot-coms wanted to do what Amazon is doing at the turn of the century. How many of them exist today at all? And Amazon is worth $600 billion in the marketplace. Perpetually dissatisfied and driven. The last item I mentioned was passionate and loyal customers and constituents. And here I think of the Red Sox. I think of the Red Sox. I am one of those people who subscribes to the MLB app, so I can watch the Red Sox wherever I am. And I'm one of millions who do it. Obviously, the people who fill Fenway Park every night are part of that as well. But we are the people who allow what is basically a mid-market team playing in a small stadium to compete at the highest levels and succeed. It's an amazing story in many ways. And I think back to when I said I'd come back and speak as soon as the Red Sox won the World Series. 3 championships, 9 playoff appearances since then. Because of the passion and loyalty of people in this region and people like me who are displaced, but will pay whatever it takes to follow our team. So those six organizations I mentioned because they're important here, but demonstrate the traits that are to lead to fabulous success in the marketplace and competitive advantage. The same thing is true about regions, and I would I'll share with you just 5 things that I see that matter a lot and in regions, and it's been mentioned and alluded to throughout the evening. It's been very reaffirming, actually, of why, again, someone like me, who's biased, of course, but looks at the greater Boston region with awe at what has been able to be done here. Because this region does demonstrate, I believe, the 5 traits that, for someone like us, who lends more money to state and local municipalities, as the biggest holder of municipal bonds in the country, we care about this because we're given 30-year money. We want these regions to be vibrant. First thing that matters is governments that work. Never take it for granted, I can tell you. You know, irrespective of who or what party is in power at a time, governments need to work if people want to invest in the long term in regions. I had an up-close opportunity to be part of the GE decision to come here. It's remarkable to watch the mayor and the governor, the city and the Commonwealth work together to win that bid in an unbelievably competitive situation. And it wasn't all about money. It was about so many different things. But the winners in regional competitions have governments that work. The consistent winners have governments that work consistently. You have that. Second thing that I see as necessary for regions to be successful and highly competitive on a national and global basis is a cadre of stabilizing forces in the economy that are less subject to disruption than traditional commercial cycles. You know, stabilizing forces in the economy is kind of a BS bingo word, and I apologize for that. What I really mean is the bedrock of educational institutions and medical institutions in this region are a huge value add as an investor, a debt provider, but very importantly as an employer. There are very few other regions in this country that are as benefited by meds and eds, in my opinion, as the greater Boston region. Philadelphia happens to be one of them, by the way, where I live. But the source of economic stability that comes from the regular arrival of those students and the aging of the population makes investing in this region from the outside lower risk. Because there's an underlying element of GDP that is going to repeat itself as long as the medical institutions stay highly competitive and the educational institutions retain their appeal nationally and globally. And Boston has that in spades. When I hear people say it's inevitable that the Sun Belt and the Western migration is going to continue and kill the great Northeast, if you will, I scratch my head and I don't actually believe it. I don't believe it because very few of those regions, if you look at it, have a bedrock of meds and eds. For economic stability and attractiveness for the workers, as does a place like Boston. The third distinguishing characteristic of highly competitive and successful regions is the ability to use the sustaining power of intellectual capital as a competitive weapon. You know, really only Silicon Valley, New York a little bit now, rivals Greater Boston as a hub of using abundant talent to change the world. It is an ecosystem, as was mentioned earlier, and it's that creates a flywheel. Innovators attract innovators, and people want to be here. So they will come and they'll pay up for the privilege. The fourth regional asset that's so important from our point of view is economic resiliency based on our willingness to adapt to disruption and big changes in the economy. Over New Year's weekend, Tom mentioned I have a home on the Cape. I took my grandsons on a very important journey, which is up to watch a Dartmouth hockey game. You have to see one of those before you turn 6 if you're a Brennan boy. And Waze took me around 128, and it was a fun, nostalgic journey up 128. Listen to the suburban commentary here, it was fun. I used to thumb to work every summer from Winchester to Weston on 128. I spent a lot of time standing in front of those buildings on 128 without getting a ride. But what's relevant and pertinent in my view is the buildings are there and the names change. And the names change because the region adapts to the economic drivers. You know, my own summary of Route 128 is when I was a kid, it was the space program. That's who were building those programs. When I was in grad school, it was mini computer makers. The great bull market of the 80s and 90s, it was financial firms, and now it's biotech. You know, very few regions have been able to make one pivot, never mind two. From my perspective, this region has had a sense of adaptability that has allowed it to pivot numerous times based on intellectual capital and a sense that creative destruction can either kill you or make you stronger. Economic creative destruction has clearly made this region stronger from this observer's point of view. The final prerequisite that is critically important if we're going to if a region's going to succeed in the in the future is a belief in opportunity for all, including our newest arrivals, and not as a politically correct or mandated matter, but as a sense that that's how regions evolve and develop. You know, this region had to evolve over many, many decades from what's your heritage to a meritocracy. And has done that spectacularly well, in my view. You know, my parents were the first people in their families to graduate from grammar school. They had an advantage, they were white, they spoke English, but they were the first people to graduate from from grammar school. And then because of the Jesuits at BC and the Commonwealth at Salem State, they graduated from college as day hops, working jobs to pay the tuition. That was 60 years ago, 70 years ago. It's not that long ago. Welcoming, opportunity, fast forward, and my father's chairman and CEO of a bank. Regions that succeed and thrive have that mindset. Think of Silicon Valley. Welcoming for all, especially the new arrivals. It's the fifth and final trait that's so distinguishing. So listen, all of us I know sitting in any audience like this, if I was sitting in Philadelphia, I'd have counterexamples at some level. But, you know, from my perspective, there isn't a region in this country that evidences those 5 distinguishing traits for sustained regional success and attractiveness, just as the Amazons and the Harvards and MITs and Googles evidence those corporate traits. It may be easy to take it for granted when you're here every day. It's enjoyable for me to have stepped back and looked at this region a little bit, my hometown region, and to think about it in the context of putting it in microcosm. Why did a GE come here when it could have gone anywhere? It's that regional attractiveness for one of the world's great companies to be part of what's happening here. So you should be proud of the Greater Boston Scorecard. The risk is always that you get complacent, that the region gets complacent about that scorecard, and you never want to have that happen. You never want to have that happen or assume that it's a right. And in that context, I'm going to end with a book recommendation for you, just what you want. It's a book called Destined for War. And if you have any interest in geopolitics, I highly encourage you to read it. It's written by a great man, a great professor at Harvard named Graham Allison, who also was the former dean of the Kennedy School. And the basic premise of the book is that, core premise of the book, I'm not going to tell you the basic premise, I want him to get the fee, so you have to buy the book. The core premise of the book is that China will inevitably surpass the U.S. as the world's greatest economic and global power. That's the fundamental premise, seen as inevitable. And I disagree with the premise. I disagree with the premise, and it's relevant to the points I made earlier. You know, I don't accept the premise because, as I said, this region is a microcosm for our country's strengths at its best. The strength of our education system, which is unrivaled in the world, for our strength of our commitment to innovation and the creative destruction that comes with it, and willingness to accept it and grow stronger because of it. Even with all the rhetoric, our commitment to immigration and opportunity for all as a nation. And then finally, our belief in free markets and free elections. Compare that to the incredibly impressive story that is China. But think for yourself whether you think it's inevitable that they surpass the U.S., and think of the Massachusetts miracle that's gone on for decades here as the metaphor for how this country can do it. You know, I may be looking at this through rose-colored glasses. I accept that as a criticism, but I don't think so. And but somebody a hell of a lot smarter than me, Warren Buffett, said it best in his annual report. I want to just share that quote as I close, and it's this: for 240 years, it's been a terrible mistake to bet against America, and now is no time to start. America is the golden goose of commerce and innovation, and it will continue to lay more and larger eggs. From my point of view, this region is as good a manifestation of that golden goose, and I'll bet on Buffett any day. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope all your dreams come true in 2018. Enjoy the cocktail party.